Welcome back to Carrie's Corner, or if it's your first time and you're starting on this one, welcome to Carrie's Corner. We're continuing our read of The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, and it's illustrated by Eric Kincaid. This is the book we're reading. Beautiful illustrations. And we are starting where we left off yesterday on Chapter 3, The Wild Wood. The mole had long wanted to meet the badger. He seemed by all accounts to be such an important person, and though rarely seen, to have an influence on everybody about the place. But whenever the mole mentioned his wish to the water rat, he always found himself put off. "It's all right," the rat would say. "Badger will turn up some day or other. He's always turning up, and then I'll introduce you, the best of fellows. But you must not only take him as you find him, but when you find him."
"Couldn't you ask him here, dinner or something?" said the mole.
"He wouldn't come," replied the rat simply. "Badger hates society and invitations and dinner and all that sort of thing."
"Well, then, supposing we go and call on him," suggested the mole.
Here's the beginning of this chapter. "Oh, I'm sure he wouldn't like that at all," said the rat, quite alarmed. "He's so very shy, he'd be sure to be offended. I've never even ventured to call on him at his own home myself, though I know him so well. Besides, we can't. It's quite out of the question because he lives in the very middle of the wild wood."
"Well, supposing he does," said the mole. "You told me the wild wood was all right, you know."
"Oh, I know, so it is," replied the rat. "But I think we won't go there just now. Not just yet. It's a long way. And he wouldn't be at home at this time of year anyhow, and he'll be coming along some day if you'll wait quietly." The mole had to be content with this. But the badger never came along, and every day brought its amusements, and it was not till summer was long over and cold and frost kept them much indoors, and the swollen river raced past outside their windows with a speed that made boating impossible, that he found his thoughts dwelling again on the gray badger, who lived his own life by himself in his hole in the middle of the wild wood. In the winter time, the rat slept a great deal, retiring early and rising late. During his short day, he sometimes scribbled poetry or did other small jobs about the house, and of course there were always animals dropping in for a chat, and so there was a good deal of storytelling and comparing notes on the past summer and all its doings. There was plenty to talk about on those short winter days when the animals found themselves round the fire. Still, the mole had a good deal of spare time on his hands, and so one afternoon, when the rat in his armchair before the blaze was alternately dozing and trying over rhymes that wouldn't fit, he decided to go out by himself and explore the wild wood, and perhaps strike up an acquaintance with Mr. Badger. It was a cold, still afternoon with a hard, steely sky overhead. When he slipped out of the warm parlor into the open air, the country lay bare and entirely leafless around him as he pushed on towards the wild wood, which lay before him now, low and threatening, like a black reef in some still southern sea. There was nothing to alarm him at first. Twigs crackled under his feet, logs tripped him, funguses on stumps looked like faces and startled him for the moment. But that was all fun and exciting. It led him on, and he went deeper to where the light was less, and the trees crouched nearer and nearer, and holes made ugly mouths at him on either side. Everything was very still now. The dusk advanced on him steadily, rapidly, gathering in behind and in front, and the light seemed to be draining away like flood water. Then the faces began. It was over his shoulder that he first thought he saw a face, a little evil wedge-shaped face, looking out at him from a hole. When he turned and confronted it, the thing had vanished. He quickened his pace, telling himself cheerfully not to begin imagining things, or there would simply be no end to it. He passed another hole and another and another, and then, certainly a little narrow face with hard eyes had flashed up for an instant from a hole and was gone. He hesitated, braced himself up for an effort, and strode on. Then suddenly, and as if it had been so all the time, every hole, far and near, and there were hundreds of them, seemed to possess its face, coming and going rapidly, all fixing on him glances of malice and hatred, all hard-eyed and evil and sharp. It could only get away from the holes. He could only get away from the holes in the banks, he thought. There would be no more faces. He swung off the path and plunged into the untrodden places of the wood. Then the whistling began. Very faint and shrill it was, and far behind him when first he heard it, but somehow it made him hurry forward. Then, still very faint and shrill, it sounded far ahead of him and made him hesitate and want to go back. As he halted in indecision, it broke out on either side and seemed to be caught up and passed on throughout the whole length of the wood to its furthest limit. They were up and alert, ready, evidently, whoever they were, and he was alone and unarmed and far from any help, and the night was closing in. Then the pattering began, and here is some pictures on the sides of what's going on. He thought it was only falling leaves at first, so slight and delicate was the sound of it. Then, as it grew, it took a regular rhythm, and he knew it for nothing else but the pat, pat, pat of little feet, still a very long way off. Was it in front or behind? It seemed to be first one, then the other, then both. It grew and it multiplied, till from every quarter as he listened anxiously, leaning this way and that, it seemed to be closing in on him. As he stood still to listen, a rabbit came running hard towards him through the trees. He waited, expecting it to slacken pace or to swerve from him into a different course. Instead, the animal almost brushed him as it dashed past, his face set and hard, his eyes staring. "Get out of this, you fool! Get out!" the mole heard him mutter as he swung round a stump and disappeared down a friendly burrow. The pattering increased till it sounded like sudden hail on the dry leaf carpet spread around him. The whole wood seemed running now, running hard, hunting, chasing, closing in round something or somebody. In panic, he began to run too, aimlessly, he knew not where. He ran up against things, he fell over things and into things. He darted under things and dodged round things. At last he took refuge in the dark, deep hollow of an old beech tree, which offered shelter, a hiding place, perhaps even safety, but who could tell? Anyhow, he was too tired to run any further and could only snuggle down into the dry leaves which had drifted into the hollow and hope he was safe for the time. And as he lay there, panting and trembling, and listened to the whistlings and the patterings outside, he knew it at last, in all its fullness, that dreadful thing which other little dwellers in field and hedgerow had encountered here, and known as their darkest moment, that thing which the rat had tried to shield him from, the terror of the wild wood. Meantime, the rat, warm and comfortable, dozed by his fireside. His paper half-finished, verses slipped from his knee, his head fell back, his mouth opened, and he wandered by the grassy banks of dream rivers. Then a coal slipped, the fire crackled and sent up a spurt of flame, and he woke with a start, remembering what he had been engaged upon, and he reached down to the floor for his verses. All right, so there we have the rat asleep in the corner down here, and the wild wood. He reached down to the floor for his verses, pored over them for a minute, and then looked round for the mole to ask him if he knew a good rhyme for something or other, but the mole was not there. He listened for a time. The house seemed very quiet. Then he called, "Moley," several times, and receiving no answer, got up and went out into the hall. The mole's cap was missing from its accustomed peg. His galoshes, which always lay by the umbrella stand, were also gone. The rat left the house and carefully examined the muddy surface of the ground outside, hoping to find the mole's tracks. There they were, sure enough. The galoshes were new, just bought for the winter, and the pimples on their soles were fresh and sharp. He could see the imprints of them in the mud, running along straight and purposeful, leading direct to the wild wood. The rat looked very grave and stood in deep thought for a minute or two. Then he re-entered the house, strapped a belt around his waist, shoved a pair of pistols into it, took up a stout cudgel that stood in the corner of the hall, and set off for the wild wood at a smart pace. It was already getting towards dusk when he reached the first fringe of trees and plunged without hesitation into the wood, looking anxiously on either side for any sign of his friend. Here and there, wicked little faces popped out of holes, but vanished immediately at the sight of the brave animal. His pistols and the great ugly cudgel in his grasp, and the whistling and pattering which he had heard quite plainly on his first entry, died away and ceased, and all was very still. He made his way manfully through the length of the wood to its furthest edge. Then, forsaking all paths, he set himself to cross it bit by bit, working over the whole ground, and all the time calling out cheerily, "Moley, Moley, Moley, where are you? It's me, it's old Rat." He had patiently hunted through the wood for an hour or so more, when at last, to his joy, he heard a little answering cry. Guiding himself by the sound, he made his way through the gathering darkness to the foot of an old beech tree, with a hole in it, and from out of the hole came a feeble voice saying,
"Ratty, is that really you?"
The rat crept into the hollow, and there he found the mole, exhausted and still trembling.
"Oh, Rat," he cried, "I've been so frightened you can't think."
"Oh, I quite understand," said the rat soothingly. "You shouldn't really have gone and done it, Mole. I did my best to keep you from it. We're river bankers. We hardly ever come here by ourselves. If we have to come, we come in couples at least, and we're generally all right. Besides, there are 100 things one has to know which we understand all about and you don't as yet. I mean, passwords and signs and plants you carry in your pocket and verses you repeat and dodges and tricks you can use. All simple enough when you know them, but they've got to be known if you're small or if you'll find yourself in trouble. Of course, if you were Badger or Otter, it'd be quite another matter."
"Surely the brave Mr. Toad wouldn't mind coming here by himself, would he?" inquired the mole.
"Oh, Toad?" said the rat, laughing heartily. "He wouldn't show his face here alone. Not for a whole hatful of golden guineas, Toad wouldn't." The mole was greatly cheered by the sound of the rat's careless laughter, as well as by the sight of his stick and his gleaming pistols, and he stopped shivering and began to feel bolder and more himself again. "Now then," said the rat presently, "we really must pull ourselves together and make a start for home, while there's still a little light left. It will never do to spend the night here, you understand. Too cold for one thing."
"Dear Ratty," said the poor mole, "I'm dreadfully sorry, but I'm simply dead beat, and that's a fact. You must let me rest here for a while longer and get my strength back if I'm to get home at all."
"Oh, all right," said the good-natured rat. "Rest away. It's pretty nearly pitch dark now anyhow, and there ought to be a bit of moon later." So the mole got well into the dry leaves and stretched himself out, and presently dropped off into sleep, though of a broken and troubled sort, while the rat covered himself up too as best he might for warmth, and lay patiently waiting with a pistol in his paw. When at last the mole woke up, much refreshed and in his usual spirits, the rat said, "Now then, I'll just take a look outside and see if everything's quiet, and then we really must be off." He went to the entrance of their retreat and put his head out. Then the mole heard him say quietly to himself, "Hello, hello, here is a go."
"What's up, Ratty?"
asked the mole. "Snow is up," replied the rat briefly, "or rather down. It's snowing hard." The mole came and crouched beside him, and looking out, saw the wood that had been so dreadful to him in quite a changed aspect. Holes, hollows, pools, pitfalls, and other black menaces to the wayfarer were vanishing fast, and a gleaming carpet of snow was springing up everywhere. That looked too delicate to be trodden upon by rough feet. A fine powder filled the air and caressed the cheek with a tingle in its touch, and the black boles of the trees showed up in a light that seemed to come from below. Well, it can't be helped," said the rat after pondering. "We must make a start and take our chance, I suppose. The worst of it is, I don't exactly know where we are, and now this snow makes everything look so very different." And that brings us to the end of today. We will start tomorrow in the middle of chapter 3. Stay tuned for how they get out of the wild wood in The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame and illustrated by Eric Kincaid. Have a great weekend. See you on Monday. Bye-bye.